This year, the town of North Andover and our VFW have partnered with Wreaths Across America, an organization to honor the veterans of our beloved community. Wreaths Across America is an organization dedicated to remembering and honoring the veterans of the United States while educating our communities about the sacrifices made by our men and women in uniform.
This is a simple act of kindness and symbolism that folks are engaging in here today as volunteers to be able to place a wreath on the grave of a veteran and remind us all that those folks are not forgotten.
Well, my father is a veteran, and there's always a wreath for him there. And when this opportunity came out at our church, I just felt it was important to, I'm not there to do my father's, but I'm here to do someone else's fathers or mothers or sons or daughters.
So I think it's very important to remember our veterans because they make up a very finite and small percentage of our population that really were willing to lay their life on the line for their country. And they essentially wrote a blank check to America up to and including their life. And that's a remarkable thing, and it's really a small, remarkable group.
Colonel James Frye of the Revolutionary War, Lieutenant Colonel in the French and Indian War before that. James Frye was born around 1710 and died of injuries he sustained during the Battle of Bunker Hill, January the 5th, 1776. My name is David Blauvelt. I'm the coordinator of education for the North Andover Historical Society here in North Andover, Massachusetts. Today we're talking about Colonel James Frye. During the French and Indian War, he was impressed into service by the British government into the Essex County Militia. The militia was required to every British citizen who was over 16 years old, and so during the French and Indian War, when the English were fighting the French and their Native American allies for conquest of territory in Canada, James Frye was made a lieutenant colonel on an expedition to take Louisburg in Nova Scotia in Canada, north of us. The Fort Louisburg was the gateway into Canadian waterways. If you wanted to sail into Canada, into any of its rivers, you needed to sail past Fort Louisburg. And so during the French and Indian War, it was very necessary for the British to take that fort from the French. Lieutenant Colonel Frye at the time went to Louisburg and helped the English take it with our Essex County Militia twice over. So during the French and Indian War, which was enormously expensive to perpetrate, our Essex County militias were traveling far up north to Canada, out west to the Appalachians, and fighting the French away from the territory whenever they could. However, after the French and Indian War, the English government needed a way to pay back all of its militia soldiers that had helped take over those portions of Canada to fight the French at the time. The English colonists outnumbered the French 20-1. So the English were most certainly to win, but after the fact, they couldn't pay the soldiers that had allowed them to win. The Essex County militias needed to be paid once more in hard currency, but hard currency was rare in the colony. It was hard to get at. Everyone was looking to be paid, and so Colonel Frye would petition on behalf of a lot of his soldiers to the British authorities in order to get them paid. It is this attempt to get the soldiers paid from taxes that were then levied on those same soldiers that would lead up to the Revolutionary War, that would stoke the tensions. James Frye, still a lieutenant colonel at this point, petitioned the British authorities for the benefit of his son, James Frye Jr., who had not been paid everything that was due during the French and Indian War. He writes, that in the year of our Lord, 1755, James Frye Jr., your petitioner's son, was a soldier in His Majesty's service in the western frontiers under the command of Captain Thomas Farrington, that on the 27th of November in that year, he was taken sick at Schenectady with the smallpox, which detained him there for near 2 months, which, sickness together with the expense in getting him home, cost your petitioner the sum of 24 pounds 6 shillings per account. Only 44 shillings were given, with 20 shillings to a pound and 12 pence to a shilling. That would make the amount that the Fryes were paid grossly under what they were actually due. In the late 1760s, when the Provincial Congress was being talked about, and in the early 1770s, when the Provincial Congress was formed, it was the duty of all of the towns to form minute companies. Minute companies being young men who were able at a minute's notice to go on alarm and defend wherever it is that they were called. James Frye, during 1775, when the Battle of Lexington and Concord and the alarm happened, was 66 years old. He was an old man, but he was still ready to fight. James Frye was promoted to colonel in the Essex County Militia leading up to the Revolutionary War. At the Battle of Bunker Hill, he was present atop his horse when many of our men from the Massachusetts Bay Colony were considering a retreat from the withering gunfire of the British. They were sustaining injuries left and right. But Colonel James Frye at that time, atop his horse, rallied his men, shouting, "Remember Louisburg! Remember Louisburg!" Colonel Frye at the time was 66 years old, having served in the French and Indian War, and a lot of his men did not remember Louisburg, but he rallied them all together, and it was effective. Shortly thereafter, he was shot through the leg by a British musket ball. That shot through the leg drove him off of his horse, but he was able to remove the bullet from the back of his horse, get back up onto his horse with the help of his slave Caesar, and then admonish the British for not being a better shot and killing him. James Frye, after being wounded at the Battle of Bunker Hill, was at the presentation and the formation of the Continental Army by George Washington, where he was going to be honored as the commander of the 1st Regiment of the Continental Army. However, James knew that he wasn't long for the world due to his infected injury, and many of his family and the people around him understood this as well. So while he was honored by George Washington, he was not given that post. James Frye died of his injuries and his infection later in that January of 1776. So we are here to honor James Frye, a lieutenant colonel, first in the English militias, and then a colonel in what would become the Continental Army of this new United States.
Hi, my name is Bill Dolan. I'm the coordinator for VFW Post 2104 in North Andover for the Wreaths Across America program this year. To access North Andover's event, using this website will allow individuals or groups of volunteers to register to place wreaths. We'd ask that one individual for any groups of volunteers identify themselves so that we can work with that one person rather than the whole group. This access can also be used to purchase wreaths, which are $17 each, and to designate a family member or significant person who may want to place the wreaths themselves. We need to raise $26,350 to purchase all the wreaths for the 1,550 veterans who are buried at the Ridgewood Cemetery. We need to raise this money by December 3rd. Wreaths Across America is dedicated to remember, honor, and teach about veterans. And this segment and the others in this series was created by North Andover CAM to help us reach out and do that. The opening ceremony honors all branches of our military with a ceremonial wreath posted for each branch by an active or retired member of that branch, and a wreath to remember the POWs and MIAs. Wreaths will have been placed throughout the cemetery for the 1,550 veterans. If successful, we intend to include all North Andover cemeteries in future years.